Afternoon, everyone. Happy Monday, even though it is Freddie Mercury's death day. I want to talk about public services here. I saw some interesting responses. I say interesting responses. I say predictable responses. They weren't particularly interesting, but it did got me thinking about something interesting. Liam's just there. Do you think we're heading the direction for more and better free services? I actually don't know. Or will we continue to spiral with costs, etc.? Well, we may not do that either. I don't think we're going to do either. But it is interesting. So what triggered this off? Zarah Sultana posted out a tweet saying it's to do with buses. It's to do with actually Rachel Reeves freezing train tickets, right? She's it should be free. But then she says, buses should be free, stuff like that. This should be free, that should be free, that should be free. So she's just being a bit silly. But a lot of right-wing responses to it going about, there's no such thing as free and blah, 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 and going on off and on about it. And I was thinking to myself, but see, this is obviously triggered by Zoran Mamdani's idea of free buses in New York. And we do have free buses in this country for some people, pensioners and so on. I personally am not in favour of universal free bus services. And that's because buses are not universal. I have said in the past, I would be in favour, this is in my socialist utopia where we've got nationalised services, right, including fully nationalised energy. And if you don't want to say free, then say complementary, right? Because, there is no such thing as free, complementary. I would be in favour of a universal complementary amount of free electricity for every household. And that's because energy is universal. Everyone uses it, right? But I'm going to argue that capitalists should welcome free public services, whether they be universally free or just free for certain people at the lower end. Now, let me explain why actually free services, whether it be free prescriptions, which you do still have in Scotland, or free buses, or even free trains, or free energy, or free whatever it is, right? I'm going to argue that this is something capitalists should like, which might sound odd, but it doesn't, right? Because think about it this way. So at the moment, we have a severe cost of living crisis, basically in this country, like lots of other Western countries as well, but let's focus on this country. So there's a certain pattern of life that is normal in this country. It's part of our culture, it's part of our expectations. There is an expectation that people should have access to a home that is dry, that is warm, that gives them some access to privacy. There is an expectation that we should have 3 meals a day. There is an expectation that we should be able to have enough clothes, that we should have functioning footwear, that we should be able to travel to work, we should be able to go on a holiday each year. And in terms of the food we eat, none of this 30p a meal bollocks that Lee Anderson talks about, that's not British culture. Where's all the British culture with Lee Anderson then? I'll tell you what British culture is. British culture is a roast on Sundays and fish and chips on Fridays, various other things during the week. But, so there's an expectation we should, if we want, not everyone wants to do that, but if you want to, that's what you should be able to do. But at the moment, there's a lot of people can't afford it. Now, why can't they afford it? 2 reasons, depends which angle you come at. You could just say, well, people are earning enough, the wages are too low. So we do know that wages in real terms have fallen. Household incomes have fallen in real terms over decades now. And people really noticed it in the last few years, but it's been happening for decades. But then there's the other side of it, the cost of everything we need. Energy is much more expensive in real terms. Water in real terms. Food in real terms is more expensive now. There's lots of things we have to get. Accommodation costs, rents or mortgages. It now costs more in real terms to buy a house than it did 10 years ago, 20 years ago, certainly 40 years ago. So that means both rents and mortgages are much more expensive. All of this eats away at your income. And if you're not on a good income, that means things have to fall by the wayside. You can't afford everything, right? So what's the solution? Mathematically, let's take politics out of it. Let's take our own personal politics out of it. Mathematically, you have to either increase the incomes or reduce the costs. It's one or the other, isn't it? It's one or the other, or preferably both. Now, here's what I'm going to argue. First of all, this is where my politics comes into it. If we had nationalised services, they would be cheaper because you take the profit out of it. You can still pay, all this thing about, oh, but then it wouldn't be run as efficiently. No, you get the same people to run it. You hire chief executives, you give them massive pay packets, bonuses. I don't give a shit. Pay them whatever it takes, right, to get good people in. I don't mind that. I don't mind a public servant being paid 2 million quid a year. I've got no shit with that. I have a problem with the profits disappearing out of the country, right? If you pay all these executives what they get paid in the private sector, pay them there, give them an index-linked public sector pension on top of it, we'd still be better off. It'd be cheaper, right? And that chief executive's bonus would not be linked to profit because there won't be any profit. It would be linked to, yes, coming in under budget. They'd still have to meet budgets, right? But also service, delivery of the quality of the service. Because what do politicians get hammered on in the election? The quality of the service. So the politicians will therefore make these executives focus on that. So that would reduce still further, right? But I'm going to say there's still an advantage to offering some of these services free. And the thing is, these reactionary right-wing people are thinking to themselves, oh, but that means taxes would have to go up. And it's like, yeah, it would. But spread more evenly, right? Because look at the situation at the moment, right? If workers cannot afford that British culture standard of living, right? What has to happen? Their wages have to go up, right? That has to happen. People are going to demand it. People are going to vote for governments that they think are going to improve their standard of living, right? The fact that they may not at the next election is neither here nor there. They're going to keep voting in a way that discards the last failure and brings in someone who promises to meet those cost of living needs. So at some point, you are going to have those wages. I mean, we're having it under Labour anyway now, but, long term, we're going to have those wages properly go up. So that puts a burden on who? If the solution, if the right wing, right, because they've got to do one or the other. They cannot tell people they cannot have access to this British standard of living, right? And that's how it should be framed. That's how, everyone, Lib Dems, Greens, Labour, anyone who wants to get in on it should frame it. You are arguing that these people should not have access to the British culture, right? Because the British culture costs a bit. British culture is a warm, dry house. British culture is a bit of privacy, some decent clothes, a Sunday roast, fish and chips, chippy tea of a Friday, things like this. All British culture. Trips to the pub. You can't afford to go to the pub. You're being denied access to British culture, right? So what's the solution? You've either got to make the services cheaper, which means you've got to either lean on those privately owned services delivered cheaper, or you've got to nationalise them, or you've got to raise wages. If you raise wages, that puts all of that burden on employers, doesn't it? Because they're the ones who pay the wages. Well, capitalists don't like that. They want to encourage business growth, which means reducing business costs. Whereas if you were to offer people, excuse me, let's say you were to offer people, at least means tested, at least people on lower wages, free bus pass, free train pass, free energy, a certain quota of energy, I'm not saying unlimited, but a certain quota of electricity and gas into their household, free prescriptions, which you actually do get. On lower incomes, you can still get free prescriptions, even in England and Wales. But let's say you were to give at least people below a certain salary free access to all of these services, right? So who pays for that? Well, that's spread evenly because it would come from general taxation, wouldn't it? That would come from income tax. You may have to raise income tax a bit. Well, that means it spreads it across all of the workers all of the workers, quite frankly. You would, it would come also from some business rates. Excuse me. It would come from capital gains. It would come from VAT, people buying things. So if you were to offer free services, at least to those, I wouldn't make it all universal, but means tested. If you were to offer free public services to people on a means tested basis, the payment is from general taxation, which smooths it out so everyone contributes to it, including businesses, but not limited to businesses. And that would lower their standard of living, which means you might be able to have someone on today's wages, minimum wage and stuff like that, who doesn't feel a cost of living crisis because their electricity is free. They may pay a bit more in tax, but it's more than compensated for the fact their electricity is free as long as they don't use above a certain amount. And it will certainly be cheaper even if they do go above. Free travel to, if they get the bus to work, that'll be free. Free water, so they don't have to think about that. All of these things will be free, which means that they can manage on this wage, which means there won't then be the pressure to raise the wages higher over time. Do you know what I mean? So I'm actually going to say that capitalists should actually be the ones promoting the idea of at least means tested free public services. Does that make sense? Big Marvinsky's straight in there going, fish and chips being £17 is ridiculous. Well, yeah. Fish and chips used to be a cheap tea. It was something you did. It was cheap. There was a time when I was growing up, a chippy tea was something you could have when you were poor because it was cheap. Cheap as chips is the phrase. And now it's not. And that's because a lot of things, Brexit included, but not exclusively Brexit, have massively raised the costs of fish. In fact, fish and chips has risen in cost more than other takeaways. So they're struggling. They are struggling, including the cost of energy themselves, because, a lot of it, but all takeaways will use a lot of energy. Fish and chips are luxury these days, yeah. But it's nonetheless, British culture says, a lot of people want a chippy tea of a Friday and a Sunday roast of obviously a Sunday roast, but, a roast dinner of a Sunday. That's British culture. And if you don't give people, if you can't give people access to this, you're basically saying, the Tories are saying that people shouldn't be able to live the British cultural life. It should be phrased to them like that. But am I right in terms of, has anyone got any, criticism of what I've just said there, in terms of, if you need people to be able to afford the cost of living, and you're not going to have, we actually can't just nationalise everything. We've all been through this over and over again. You can try and slowly move towards it, but at the end of the day, these public services are privatised, which means that you can't just make these services much cheaper in the next few years. But what you could do, and you would have to raise taxes for it, but what you could do is means test these services being free for people on lower incomes. And then, it's really this choice. Either you need to pressure employers to pay higher wages by raising the minimum wage above inflation, things like that. But you need to either significantly raise wages. That puts all of the burden on employers, or you have universal free public services paid by general taxation. That spreads the burden across everyone. Isn't it better for capitalists to spread the burden than it is to load it all up on employers? I think that's right. Liam, they say, I miss my traditional Friday night chippy teas. The Inland Revenue should pay through the nose for tax accountants who specialise in tax avoidance. They are doing. Watch tax loopholes closed down. No, they're already doing that. One of the first things Rachel Reeves did, we knew for years before the election, she'd actually been reading up. She'd been reading books on people who'd done this in other countries. She had actually been, finding out how in practical terms you close down tax loopholes and so on. And one of the first things she did last year was hire a load of extra tax inspectors. And she's been going after not just tax evaders, which she's carrying on doing, but tax avoiders even. closing down tax avoidance schemes. But it is easier said than done. But, you know, she has actually been doing that. Have a set national pay. Well, you're now talking about communism. People won't want that. I always say, you know, people describe communism as evil because they look at communist dictatorships and they were evil. Communism itself is actually lovely. It's a lovely concept. Totally unworkable. People don't want it. It doesn't. It's like pacifism. It's completely incompatible with human nature. You know, you need a system of government that is compatible with human nature, which is very difficult because, remember, we have evolved to live in small tribes. And so complex societies mean we're constantly making the wrong decisions because we didn't evolve. Our brains and our social instincts did not evolve to managing complex societies. So when you're designing a complex society or amending it, you need to take account of human behaviour. You say, then you get the workers who do pay thinking they might as well do less for more in their minds. I'm not sure what that's to do with. Oh, if you had a set pay. Yeah, well, that's the thing. You know, human nature being what it is, there are some people who are driven to innovate, but for a lot of people, it's the motivation of money. You will do more work for more money or some other reward. It doesn't have to be money, but you know, money is the currency these days. Whereas if you're not going to get any reward for it, a lot of people won't do it. Like, they might do it if they're particularly, you know, if they have a particular passion for it, but by and large, they won't. So yeah, you need to be able to reward people who have more in-demand skills and for just doing more work. Like, you know, who's going to volunteer for overtime if you're not getting paid for it, right? So there's no need for it. You just need to make sure. I don't have a problem with people getting rich, by the way. I only have a problem with people being poor. I have no issue with the rich. I have only an issue with the poor, right? People shouldn't be poor. I mean, poor as a relative term, you're always going to have, if you have any variation at all. But I have a problem with people like, you know, a government really should be clear. A government should be clear. This is the standard of living that we think is the British standard of living. And everything should work from there. If I were to be made Chancellor, it'd probably be a very bad idea, I will just say. But if I were to be made Chancellor, one of the first things I would do is to try and change the culture of the Treasury. I would say, we're going to consult the public. What is the expected British standard of living that everyone should have access to? Everyone living in this country should have, or everyone living and working in this country should have access to. Work out what it is and then say, right, anyone who's working or retired as a pensioner, having paid their contributions, should have access to that standard of living. And if they don't, we need to change things until they do. That's what you need to work to. All too often in government, it's all about trying to, you know, governments do want to try and boost people's income. Even Conservatives want to do that because they know that that means they'll spend more and the economy will do better. They just keep sticking to this trickle-down bollocks that Ronald Reagan came up with. I mean, they didn't used to be like this, the Conservatives. There used to be all sorts of other dickheadery to them, but they never used to be like this. This is pissing Reagan and Thatcher's legacy. Working for the Underground and getting free travel on London buses and tubes offered me huge opportunities for social mobility. Was able to save for a deposit and get out of poverty. I mean, if you get fringe benefits, I mean, yeah, you could say the same thing. Like if you work for Tesco, once you work for Tesco for a while, you get, I think supermarkets in general, you get like 10% off. So, you know, you do sometimes get little benefits that are helpful, but you know, why not? Why not to people in general? Why not? That would ease the pressure. That would ease the burden on employers. That would, you know, if anyone's serious about easing the burden on businesses, one really good way would be, and I'm not saying the government should do this because maybe the public wouldn't like those taxes going up. Because remember, it's not the poorest people in society that are the big voters, right? But, and this would work for pensioners as well, right? People below a certain income whatever you work it out what it would be. Let's say £30,000 a year or something. Let's just say, I don't know what it would be, but work out what is the income levels where people are really struggling. And I know you'll still get some parts of the country where it's a bit more of a struggle than others, or maybe you could do it regionally, right? But maybe you could do it regionally. But anyone below a certain level gets access to a quota of free energy, what is considered to be, a reasonable amount of electricity for that household to use based on its occupants. So a certain quota of free electricity, a certain quota of free water. Again, you don't want people wasting. Free bus pass, which could be just for your area, doesn't have to be national. But in the sort of region that your home and workplace is, to help with work. You could even offer limited free rail travel. Maybe you offer, because we used to get that when I was growing up because my dad worked for British Rail. So we used to actually have a family, my mum would take myself and my sister on little day trips at the weekend, not every weekend, but we had a certain allocation each year of free train travel, right? But you could give that to people based on not working for the train companies, but working for lowish wages, and people could get access to this, and it would do lots of things as well. I'll tell you another thing it would do, because it would also, if it applies to anyone below a certain level of income, it applies to people who are unemployed as well. So that would reduce the welfare budget, wouldn't it? It would increase it somewhere else, still be paid for somewhere else, but. This sort of idea is, again, I'm not in favour of it being universal, because I'm not in favour of the idea unless, there was an argument of the winter fuel allowance being better as universal because it's just cheaper to administer. But something like this, I'm quite sure you can means test. Just do that. I don't see the problem with that. This would be universal minimum services rather than universal income, yes, which I think eliminates the option for the price to simply go up to consume the universal income through rent. So yes, well, this is it. Because again, from where I'm coming from is most people who are struggling with the cost of living, they're not actually bothered about their salary. Most people I come across are not that bothered. I haven't been when I've been a worker. Most people are not bothered about their salary. They're bothered about what that salary can provide for them. They're bothered about their standard of living. And this is why the focus on the cost of living has gotten so much more acute in the last few years, because even during the years of austerity, when people still voted for the bloody Tories, it was because most people were getting by still. They were being squeezed, but they were getting by. So they didn't think there was a problem. They only thought there was a problem. Some people were being squeezed then and they thought there was a problem. But in terms of most, like we were talking about the middle classes here, they at the time weren't being squeezed. So they didn't think there was a problem. People don't care about their salary. They only care about the salary lasting the month. They just want the money. They want the month to last longer than their money. That's it. That's all most people want. So, at the moment, the cost of living is very high. But if you were to say to people, which would you prefer, £500 extra in your pocket, or we just take £500 off your bills? They don't care, because it's the same thing. It amounts to the same thing for them. And as you say, yeah, that's a very good point. If you do it, if you take it from that end, if you make the cost of living cheaper for people rather than giving them more money, it reduces inflationary measures potentially as well. So there's that. Chippies don't even have the same taste anymore. Well, it depends how far back you're going. If you're going right back to the days when they were cooked in beef dripping, then no, they don't have the same taste anymore. But you can always do those yourself at home. I make my own chips at home. I do sometimes get a chippy tea, because particularly if you want something else with it, it is just easier. But my chips are better because they're done properly. I do the proper triple cooked chips. Although I still mostly do those in vegetable oil, because sometimes I'm cooking for a vegetarian, but they are much better done. If you're not a vegetarian, they are much better done in like animal fat. It has to be said. No newspaper bags. Well, that was a bit of a misnomer anyway. They never used to be wrapped in newspaper. They were wrapped in paper and then newspaper around the top. Being wrapped directly in newspaper was banned in the Victorian day, so no one remembers that. You just remember the outer layer being newspaper. You're making me hungry. I'm sorry. It's not Friday yet. It's Monday. In fact, on Monday, we should be having a more austere tea on a Monday because we should be having the leftovers from the roast the day before. That should be what's happening. If it was a normal British household, we would be having leftovers from the roast from the day before. And then I actually have got stuff to make a rhubarb crumble and custard for this week. So we'll be having some of that. But that's what I'll be having for my tea later. I didn't do a roast yesterday. So I did do a roast actually on Friday, interestingly. Did roast beef and stuff. How do you think the majority would react if they were all offered jobs at £100,000 plus, but with no actual work commitment? Well, exactly. I don't think anyone is seriously suggesting we just give everyone a universal basic income like that. In fact, in terms of universal basic income, because I think we're going to need to do something like it at some point in the future. But no one has ever come up with, it's not like anyone's come up with a system that provably works. Even that may need to be means tested. But again, maybe the answer to universal basic income is to have universal basic services. Instead of the money, you don't pay, as long as you stick to a certain amount and obviously make sure everyone's got an easy to read meter so they know what they're getting. Right, you've got this amount of electricity. You can see how much you use in a day, and the smart meter will tell you what you're on course for using for the month, and then you know what you're supposed to use. So it'll tell you whether you're below or above your quota, and you can adjust accordingly. Do the same for gas, do the same for water. Again, your bus travel for people on a lower wage, free bus travel within their region, doesn't have to allow them to go up and down the country. Stuff like that. More incomes, more tax. Yes, it is. But the problem is, how do you get the more income? It is, yeah, it's absolutely true. Yeah, if the government suddenly whacked up the minimum wage to £20 an hour, yes, that would be more tax. But it would be a load of businesses going under, wouldn't it? The problem we're trying to come at here is, how do you get people quickly to be able to afford the cost of living? Whacking up their income to be able to cope puts the burden on businesses, and a lot of businesses would go under. That's the problem. And we've already seen, just with that small increase on the burden last year with the national insurance, we know that reduced the amount of hiring that happened in the last year. Not as much, it's overblown sometimes, but it has had a real world effect. If Rachel Reeves had not put up employers' national insurance, unemployment would not now be as high. We do know that for a fact. So there'd be more people in work, and then they'd be contributing more taxes, but not enough to have, to have filled in that hole. So yes, it is true, more income does equal more tax, but it is also true to say, at the moment, we cannot rapidly whack up those incomes to meet the cost of living. So do it from the other end, maybe. Do it from the other end. And as I say, I think capitalists should support it. Socialists, there's arguments both ways, I think, for a socialist. Like, I don't think it should be universal. I think it should be targeted. But nonetheless, for a capitalist, I would say something like this reduces the burden on businesses. And isn't capitalism all about helping businesses, private enterprise? Well, it helps private enterprise because you can keep down wages while still having workers who can afford the cost of living and therefore are healthy and happy workers. Handman, I feel I like drifting off into cooking. I occasionally like drifting off into cooking, yes. But never mind, I come back. A certain amount of kilowatt hours free. Yeah, exactly that. That's exactly what you wouldn't say free, because then people would overuse it and we already have problems with capacity. You would say a certain quota. And it would mean taxes would have to go up. So the people who are earning good wages would just pay more tax and wouldn't get anything out of it, which is probably where you're going to run into political problems with it. But I am going to argue that economically it would be better. And I'm also going to argue it's the sort of thing that capitalists should approve of, because it means that businesses do not have to pay as high wages. And the public will be happier. Before all that, women shouldn't be paying for sanitary towels, etc. Well, you could do that as well. You could say a certain quota of sanitary products. Yeah, you could do that. Why not? A voucher for sanitary products. So much per month. There's lots of things you could do with this. But again, it's anything where there's a cost to it that is a problematic cost for people below a certain income. Just give them a quota. Just give them a free quota. National income should be scrapped in favour of income tax. Yes, there's a lot of arguments for that. However, I'm afraid the clinching argument is that pensioners would flip their lids and they vote. So until everyone else, because national insurance being scrapped and folded into income tax, so income tax goes up to compensate, that would benefit every worker. Or the vast majority of workers anyway. I suppose if you're on a really high salary, maybe not. But should we say the vast majority of workers, you will benefit from national insurance being scrapped and folded into income tax, but pensioners don't benefit. Pensioners would be very unhappy with that. So yeah, ain't going to happen. The best case scenario is if you had different governments in sequence over a very long period of time who kept nibbling away. Like Labour were up until recently thinking of raising income tax but lowering national insurance by the same amount. Now they were doing that to raise taxes overall. Now let's say you had a government that didn't need to raise net taxes. They just wanted to shift it, nudge it. So you could raise income tax by a small amount and reduce national insurance by a larger amount. And you could nudge that. So if you had different governments, Labour, Conservative, whoever the hell, over a period of, I don't know how long you'd need to do it for it to be unnoticeable or difficult to notice. But if you had governments over a period of decades, maybe 30, 40 years or so, I don't know how long it would take, who just every few years, not every year, because then it'd be more, but every few years just nudged it a bit, just lowered national insurance, raised income tax a bit. If you just did that over time, over a period of time, let's say every 2 years, you dropped national insurance by 1%, or the main block of national insurance by 1%, then it would probably take about 30 years. You might be able to get away with it. But then you would need the media to... and you'd need successive governments, like whenever a government changed, you'd need the new government to also go, this is a good idea, let's do it. And that would be possible because left and right both agree that national insurance ain't working. But party politics being what it is, the current government, whenever it does it, the opposition will point it out to the pensioners, right? So I don't think it would realistically happen. But there we are anyway. Is that Games Workshop boxes in the top left of the screen? Possibly. There are some Games Workshop stuff there. In the meantime, I'll just do some little plugs. We'll get rid of that. I will just point out, I am going live again all afternoon on Twitch though. So I can be found on Twitch, but under the title Politics Phil, not a different bias. And I will have a merch store coming out this Friday. I did do a video for members yesterday, explain all the details. I'll go over the relevant details tomorrow, but that will be coming this Friday. So a little plug there. But other than that, have a great day, everyone. Have an enjoyable rest of the week until I see you again. And I will be back on Twitch from 1 o'clock today.